Whenever someone tells me they're trying to like self-improve, I'll tell them go start a company.
That's Dara. He sold his first AI startup after only 8 months. He's raised millions from Keith Rabois to let you clone yourself, or anyone else for that matter, after getting inspired by wanting to talk to an AI version of his grandfather. He told me how he impressed Keith and how he found the right co-founder, and also what the only differentiator for software is in the age of AI. This is Dara Lajevardian's founding journey.
Dara, what's up, man? Thanks for coming on the pod.
Michael, thanks for having me.
I guess, how do I know this is the real you? First of all, how do I know this isn't your clone?
You don't. Could be my clone. Actually, you do know because the video technology is not quite past the uncanny valley, but one day you may not know.
Future podcast. Next time you come back, it has to be the clone. That's the deal.
I'll send my clone. I'll send the clone.
Okay, but for real, I think let's go back to the sort of very, very beginning, way before clones were probably even on your radar, beginning of your sort of entrepreneurship journey. I want to talk about your grandfather, right? So big inspiration for you. He was an entrepreneur, I think, back in Iran. Tell me about that and how that sort of has inspired you to go down this path.
Yeah, so my grandfather was a huge businessman in Iran before the revolution. Some even called him like the Rockefeller of Iran. He had oil businesses, textile businesses, detergent businesses. And growing up, I would always hear about him from different family members. And he was around. He was just pretty old. And I unfortunately never learned Farsi, which my parents want me to learn, and I'm going to learn one day. But so he was always someone I looked up to. I studied physics and computer science in college because I was obsessed with comic books in high school. And I really wanted to recreate Jarvis. I was reading Iron Man comics and I wanted to recreate Jarvis. So I catered my entire major around being able to do this one day. And then after college, I worked at a company called C3 AI for a couple of years and left to start my first company. And starting your first company is really hard, as I'm sure many people can relate to, especially as a solo founder. It really, whenever someone tells me they're trying to like self-improve, I'll tell them go start a company, because it makes you kind of confront your core and your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities. And at that time, I was kind of grappling with like who I was and how I wanted to build a business and what kind of business I wanted to run and what does it even mean to be an entrepreneur. And a memoir about my grandfather came out and I read that book and it talked about his life, but I think the main emphasis of the book was his principles and the things that really made him someone that was different from the rest, someone that was successful in the long term. And something that I noticed about him was his integrity. You know, that he was known for just doing good business with good people and treating people right. And that ended up paying off in the long term. And so I was thinking, you know, I would love to be able to get my grandfather's advice on what I was doing. And he had a stroke 2 years prior, so I couldn't ask him directly. And it's different than just reading a book because I wanted to apply, you know, what would he do in my situation? And so at the time, was using LLMs in my first startup Friday and kind of built a V1 version of a clone of my grandfather and use it for advice. And I, you know, sent it to my dad, sent it to my family. And that was obviously like a really, really cool experience that has led me to where I am today.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that I want to dig into there, especially how you kind of come full circle and he's become the inspiration, a big part of the inspiration, at least for Delphi. But let's go back first to C3, because I think you and I both sort of have this experience in what I like to call like the last generation, the previous generation of AI and machine learning, back when it was called machine learning, right? Like all these logistic regressions and XGBoost and all this stuff that now everyone's like, oh, LLMs and transformers. And so my question for you would just be, when you first saw transformers were going to be a thing, like the transformer paper came out, later GPT-3 came out, did the light bulb sort of immediately go off for you that like this was your new calling and your new mission?
Building an audience is a full-time job, or at least it can feel like that when you're busy running your startup. But with AI making software easier to build, getting distribution is more important than ever. I can help. After growing my LinkedIn to over 40,000 followers and having 100,000 across all platforms, as well as a 60,000 subscriber newsletter, I know how impactful having an audience can be when you're building a startup these days. So I started Megaphone Studios, a ghostwriting agency specifically built for founders and their startups. Think of us like your startup's chief content officer. We turn your LinkedIn, X, or newsletter into a machine for lead generation, follower growth, and building your influence as a thought leader in your space. Our process is super lightweight for you while still delivering content that only you uniquely could write. And our plans are flexible with no long-term lock-in because we know how fast things can change at startups. Oh, and I brought my buddy Blake Emal along to help me run the business. He has even more followers than I do. So email me at hauk@megaphone.network and mention the pod for a first month discount.
Yeah, at C3, I was working on old NLP infrastructure, so like Spacey, Bag of Words. So when I first saw an LLM, it blew my mind. And this was in a time when everyone was obsessed with crypto. And I was like, guys, do you not see like what is happening? You project this out a couple iterations, like every knowledge-based job is based on language. So it really kind of freaked me out and kind of started building little side projects and tools. And that's when I left C3 and decided to figure out what was there.
Yeah, I guess like, did you have sort of a plan in mind to take advantage of this inflection point? Or was it just like, let me just throw myself into this and kind of see where the journey takes me?
So I actually was leaving C3 with a co-founder. We were going to use LLMs to build some like space anomaly detection software for rocket ships. And he decided to go into crypto. I decided I didn't want to pursue that idea alone. So then I was just like blank slate. What can I build to just get myself off the ground? And I was ordering something on Amazon and I was like, damn, this UI is so complex. Like, why do I have to click all these things? I wish I could just text the phone number what I want and it would buy it for me. And that's built the prototype for Friday, which allows you to buy anything with a text. Went kind of viral on Twitter. And I decided, okay, I'll just work on this for the next however many months and see what happens.
Yeah, I think I saw that when it went viral originally. I thought it was cool. It made a lot of sense. But you sold it super fast, right? It was just like, what, 6 months, maybe a little more than 6 months?
Yeah, it was 8 months. And there were a couple things. I think one, I learned that if you're going to replace a habit like shopping, it being 5x better is not enough or 10x better. Like Amazon is so ingrained in our online habits that if you're going to try to build a competitor to shopping, it needs to be something like entirely new. I don't even know what that thing is. I don't know if that thing actually exists. So that's something I learned. We did kind of find traction in the parent space. So parents were using Friday to order things like groceries or toilet paper or paper towels because they're so busy around the house. I kind of came to the conclusion that I don't want to be a solo founder. It's a lonely journey. And I want to work on something that I'm super passionate about and not just some random idea I stumbled into. So as soon as I got the acquisition offer, I was like, this is great. Like I now I need to know, like, I want to find a co-founder and I want to work on something that makes me super passionate.
When you were like, tell me about the acquisition process. Was that, was it easy to find sort of common ground and a price that made sense for you, or how did that work?
So it wasn't like a life-changing acquisition. There was one person who had kept in touch with me since the launch, and he had offered to acquire the business, but he wanted me to go work there. So I was like, you know what? This is a fine acquisition price, but I don't really want to go work anywhere. So I put Friday on MicroAcquire, which I think is now acquire.com for the same price, and got an offer, just asset acquisition, and sold it.
Wow. Okay. Super simple. You basically got inspired to get the deal that you wanted.
Yeah. Seriously. I was like, okay, I'm just going to do this.
Well, that's cool, man. Congrats. After that, so I think after that, you actually did go work somewhere though. You went to work at OpenStore, right?
Yeah. So I'm a big Tony Robbins guy, and like Tony Robbins has this decision-making process where you write the outcome, and then for all your options, you kind of put a probability of what will get you to that outcome. And so for OpenStore, I wasn't necessarily that interested in e-commerce, but I was super interested in learning from Keith. And I knew that Keith would attract the kind of people that I would want to co-found with, people who take their work very seriously and take their craft very seriously. And so I decided, hey, I'm going to go to Miami, learn from Keith, find a co-founder. And that's what happened.
So you knew that eventually you would go back and you'd be a founder again. You'd start something new. Just you had to find the right person to do it with first.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you know who that person was when you found them? Like, what were you looking for?
To be honest, I wasn't trying to force it. Like, I think having a co-founder is like having a partner that you get married to. You never want to force a relationship. So it kind of happened organically because Sam, he joined OpenStore and we were kind of rivals in the beginning. And then one weekend we decided to just take a flight to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, which is not a very touristy city. So I think Sam Altman has a blog out there that if you really want to test a co-founder relationship, go do like a high stakes travel trip with them. And I think Sam and I just found a lot of common ground and commonality. And then we started a book club together at OpenStore. And that's where we decided to build a clone of Tony Fadell so that we could get his feedback on the discussion around his book, Build, which is one of my favorite startup books now.
Great book. Yeah. On my list of like top 20 or so books for founders for sure.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay. So I guess you guys are now down the road. You've been co-founders for a while at this point. It was the right call. No grass is always greener sort of realizations there. You guys are a good pair.
Yeah, it was definitely the right call. I think our values are aligned, which I think is super, super important for startups. Kind of like the same thing I said about my grandpa, like the principles that you live your life by. I think those are aligned. We complement each other in really good ways. I like to move super fast, and he is more patient and detail oriented. So like I'm driving the ship and he's making sure the ship isn't sinking, which is good.
Yeah, it's important to have that complementary skill set, but also shared values. I think the third thing that I always think about is like sort of different goals in terms of like personal aspirations, right? There can only be one CEO, right? So if one person is like, I'm going to be the COO or the CTO, other person be the CEO. It works a lot better when that's sort of understood.
Yeah. And Sam was an infra engineer at OpenStore and I was a product engineer. So he was already kind of like a technologist thinking about infrastructure and I was thinking about product and customers. So it kind of aligned well there.
I guess going from solo founder to having a co-founder, anything that's been sort of slower or harder just by the nature of having to sort of be more collaborative and get alignment on decisions, things like that?
I think it took a while for us to get a stride of our relationship and, you know, how we balance work. I was coding for the first year. Now I don't code at all. So it took a while, but I think it's very natural. I mean, it's always great to have someone to bounce ideas off of. As a founder, you can become very tunnel visioned and obsessed with your own vision of the product and the customers. And I think I'm a little delusional sometimes. And Sam is very much a realist. So he's able to keep me grounded on earth, which I think being delusional as a founder is almost necessary because you're trying to do something insane, but you do need a little bit of grounding.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's good to have that yin and yang, that pull on both sides. I guess I don't have the numbers to back this up, but sort of anecdotally, I think I see more founders do the opposite of what you did. They go from having co-founders on maybe their first company and then do the solo founder thing later. Do you think that's true? And if so, like why do you think it is? And why do you do the opposite?
I would imagine that majority of people who've done that, the first startup didn't work out, and most startups don't work out because of co-founder conflicts. So I think there's a book called Loonshots, and there's a concept called the false fail, and that means you experience something and you say, "Oh, that was wrong, so I'm going to try something else." And I think the thing that is wrong for a lot of these cases is the value alignment isn't there. It's not that having a co-founder is wrong; it's that you are marrying someone, and you should treat your co-founder with the same level of meticulousness that you would finding a partner that you're going to marry.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That concept of the false fail. That's interesting. Do you think that having a co-founder is more necessary or more valuable if you're building a venture-backed company? Or do you think it's the same for bootstrap versus VC?
I've seen a lot of bootstrap founders do it solo, and it's definitely easier bootstrap. I think where a co-founder really comes in handy is if you're doing something that doesn't exist. And it's not just like a technological risk, but also a marketing risk. Because then you really need to spend time on like product marketing. How do you communicate this value prop to the customer? We're talking about an entirely new way of consuming medium and communicating with other people. So that definitely could not have done this alone because so much thought is needed on the product marketing side. And it's not just, building a B2B SaaS tool where the problem is very defined and you can just build that at home. You don't even need to hire anyone.
That's a really good point. I think that the space that you guys are in particular with Delphi, there's been crazy growth and especially as LLMs of, people got more comfortable with them. And you've seen that sort of on multiple sides of the market, right? I think you guys are sort of I see you guys sort of as like the antithesis of the sort of like AI girlfriend, character AI type apps, right? You guys sort of are maybe taking a more serious lens to parasocial relationships with AIs. How do you see yourself in relation to them? And I think, how do you see the marketing challenge in relation to them too?
Sure. I mean, when we started based on the problem, access to expertise. People want personalized advice. One-on-one mentorship is proven to improve your ability to learn by 2 standard deviations. On the other side, you have people trying to scale themselves. They write content to scale themselves, or they hire teams and train those teams in their way of thinking to scale themselves. There's almost two sides, like trying to reach each other, but there's a gap. So we think of Delphi as a solution to that, and we think of AI as a tool that enables that solution. And I think just talking about it that way is very different than, AI girlfriend. Notice AI is in the word, AI girlfriend, or AI companions, character AI, talk to these characters. I think character AI is great for entertainment, where we try to think about in a world where we can enable one-on-one advice from anyone. For that to work, privacy laws are probably going to catch up to us. So we can't do it without people's permissions. We need to make having a clone something that's actually useful to people. It can't just be, this novelty tool. You create a chatbot and people talk to. It has to be more around that. It has to be like a full-on end-to-end product.
Well, I guess, where does that market go, right? Like, what's the future of these clones as we see, foundation models move towards enabling agents, right? And more proactive behaviors rather than just being reactive in like a chat window. How do you see you guys' role to take advantage of that changing?
Yeah, I mean, there's many different ways I can describe the different end states of Delphi. And so I'll walk you through a couple. One is kind of verticalizing the human access stack. And so what I mean by that is we're all constrained by time. And so your clone is kind of your personal website, the inbound, the people to learn about you and, maybe pay for your knowledge, maybe just get insights. And on your side, you can prioritize who's actually worth talking to. So it's lead qualification, it's making you money, it's saving you time. On the next level, I do think that our attention spans are getting worse with things like TikTok and Reels. Reading a 400-page book to learn something or sitting through a 40-hour course is likely going to become less and less likely. And so the promise of a clone is it is that next iteration of a book or a course where this expert can teach you something in a personalized way that's relevant to your own goals, keep you accountable at the cadence that works for you. The last thing, which I think is way further out, is the next version of LinkedIn. Because with LinkedIn, you can just find people based on their brands and their schools, their companies. There's no way to find people based on their thoughts and their expertise and their mind. And I think that's really how we connect. That's how you find co-founders. That's how you find mentors. That's how you find partners. It's the mental alignment.
Yeah, I totally agree. If you want deeper and like real and authentic relationships with people, it's not just about what club were you a part of or what frat were you in college. It's, do you guys share values? Do you see the world in similar ways or complementary ways at least? That sounds like a really, really big vision and ambitious vision. I guess, was that what you pitched to Founders Fund when you guys were raising?
It's funny because we started with this idea and then we kind of pivoted to just like learning from historical figures and philosophers and, personalized advice. And then we came back to our initial idea once we realized like we got 3 cease and desists from people we cloned without their permission. This is only going to get worse. We need to make cloning useful for people. And that's where our original idea of, cloning to scale expertise, but eventually you have all the clones in the world and that allows you to find anyone based on any need you want in your life.
How did you communicate that in you just communicated it to me in a concise way, but like, how do you translate that into a pitch setting, into a deck that maybe got someone like Keith, who probably, sees a ton of AI companies pitch him? How do you guys stand out?
But I think the thing that really resonated with Keith is we read books, we watch YouTube videos, we listen to podcasts, we follow people on Twitter. There's obviously a desire to learn. The self-help book industry is $12 billion. Online courses are $80 to $100 billion. But if you look at completion rate, it's very low. People are paying, but they're not finishing the courses. Yeah. And so there is a missing tool to be able to learn from someone in a way that's personalized to you and keeps you accountable and actually grows with you. And it's funny because Keith has talked about this idea of like a goals app on many different podcasts. I don't think he was thinking about it in the same terms as clones, but I think that's what really resonated with him. And from the classic founders fund mentality, you bet on things that many people may not agree with. Most people don't like the ed tech space or the learning space. And
Right.
I think that's a false fail because just because there haven't been any enormous outcomes doesn't mean that it's a bad space. It's a very hard space to build in because education requires motivation, understanding psychology, getting people interested in what you're doing. So it's hard.
Yeah, I think education is one of those markets that it's easy to get investors excited about what you're doing because it's a very noble sort of goal to go after that market and educate people in a better way. But it is hard to scale. It is hard to get the sort of outcome that you want. So I guess, how do you see the product evolving to sort of capture that? Because right now you guys are working with people who have big audiences and who can help get the word out about Delphi. But obviously, if you want to reach venture scale, you probably need to start going to not just these big creators. So how are you thinking about that? Is there going to be some true marketplace component in the long run? Like, what does that look like?
I would say actually we have a pretty good distribution of customers. We have big creators, but we also have like a bunch of niche experts with smaller communities. We have small business owners using Delphi to scale themselves to customers or employees. And all of our growth has been pretty organic and word of mouth. I think that we're starting to build some really great case studies on the benefits of having a clone. And once we have those, I'm actually reading this book right now, Crossing the Chasm. I don't know if you've read it.
Yep, love it.
But it talks about how, you have the early adopters who are like, yeah, cloning, I'm going to try that out. And then you have the early majority that are like, I'm not going to try cloning until I see the true benefit. And so I think getting those case studies up and running and then building out the marketplace and consumer platform where it's also a place where you can reach more people versus just satisfy your current audience, I think will be very important.
I guess in that vein, then, what do you feel like you and the team need to do to reach the next round of funding? Like, what's the next big milestone for the company?
So I think the number one thing that's aside from new features is, does the clone sound like the person? And can it guide someone towards value? I think there is an infinite slope in trying to recreate the human mind and code. And so that's going to continually be the most important part of our product. And it is with customers, it is with consumers. Does this sound like a unique person? That's not like generic AI, but it sounds like a person that you would talk to on the street. The second thing is clone proactivity. So not relying too much on consumer intent, but clones being able to intelligently follow up with people and check in on them and keep them accountable. And consumers are much more likely to pay for guidance than just information. When they buy a book or a course, they're paying for an outcome. So I think the clone proactivity adds a lot there. And then the third thing is the consumer platform, creating a place where you can go and state your goals and be recommended the best people to help you with those goals. Maybe building an ad network on top of that, where if you're talking to a sleep coach, the sleep coach could recommend a melatonin brand. And it is an ad, but it's actually relevant to your goals. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about right now.
That's smart. That's a smart addition to the ad network. That'd be a huge revenue driver for you guys. One thing you mentioned that I want to go deeper on is growth, right? So you mentioned you guys haven't really done any paid marketing yet. It's all PLG. Why sort of the firm focus on that? Is that an opinionated stance, or is that just because you guys haven't had time to set up paid channels yet?
Opinionated stance, and that's because there's a lot of shiny object syndrome right now in AI. And so you could market Delphi and be like, clone yourself, and people will try it and then they'll probably churn because they're just trying it. And you see AI enthusiasts versus, if we get someone who's super happy with the product and they present it to their audience and they tell people about it, then it's organically growing, and it's growing through a sense of adding value to the customer. So if it's not adding value to the customer, it's not going to grow. And so it makes it more difficult for us in the short term. But in the long term, I think it sets us up for success because our growth is purely based on, does Delphi add value to our customers?
Do you think that that's sort of the silver bullet for PLG is just as like a mechanism, right? As a motion, is just let's add as much value to our customers as possible, and that's the North Star? Or do you think there are like best practices around doing good PLG versus bad PLG that you can share?
When I say we haven't spent a lot of money on marketing, I still post a lot on Twitter and post on LinkedIn. And those are very good channels. We have to get our name out there somehow, but we've seen the most success with finding a central node in an audience we want to capture, making him super happy, him or her super happy, and then leveraging his happiness to get us more customers. And they're more than happy to help us with that because we've worked on making them happy. It's a very slow approach, but I think especially with what we're doing, where it's so people focused, it's going to pay off in the long term.
Do you think, speaking of the long term, do you think that you can reach like true venture scale and have a venture scale outcome just based on a PLG motion? Or do you think that eventually you'll need to layer in some of these other channels?
I think we could. I mean, if you think about it, this creator-led distribution, every creator with over 100,000 followers that posts their clone is getting us more distribution. And they're incentivized to bring people to their clone because maybe they're getting money or they're getting data, engagement, emails, numbers, and it helps us out as well. So I think thinking about how we can incentivize creators to share their clone, well, they will share their clone if it's making them happy. And there's a lot of reasons creators get happy. They get happy because of expressions of gratitude and following count, usage, money, analytics. So there's a bunch of different reasons why someone might be happy and want to share Delphi.
Do you think there's any world, like you seem pretty firm on the PLG is the way, and I don't disagree with you. But I'm saying, is there any world where you would want to do like a paid channel and add that into the mix and kind of add fuel to the fire and use some of those venture dollars and put it away?
Sure. I mean, we're lightly testing paid channels, not in like a big way, just to kind of see, what's the opportunity here. I think pre-Series A, I'd rather just focus on PLG and organic growth, because once we get to critical mass, then I think it's going to grow on autopilot, and then we can explore paid marketing channels to see what works. We've seen conferences work really well. And so a customer will invite us to a conference where we get to tell the Delphi story. We meet a lot of people through there. There's like social proof. But obviously conferences, at a certain point, you reach everyone that goes to those conferences. So you got to constantly think about, new markets and new people.
That makes a lot of sense. Conferences would be definitely a good channel for a product like what you guys have built. Okay, so things in AI space are moving so fast, so quickly, right? I think traditionally there's this sort of happy medium between move fast and break things versus product quality. And I think we're actually seeing, more of a shift towards product quality and brand and like high design and opinionated design than I've seen in my years in the startup world. Are you seeing that? Is that something you guys are thinking about? And what's your opinion there?
Well, I think for us, there's two reasons. This is definitely a case for us. One, because when you're building a platform that promises to clone people and they're going to give you their private data, their name, their likeness, their identity, and you're going to represent them in front of their audience, the bar for quality is so high. There is no room for error, or else people are never going to trust you or talk to you again if you make them look bad in front of their audience. So we really care about quality. We care about brand because I don't think AI itself is a brand. I think people talk about AI, but that's not a brand. It doesn't tell a story. I also think that AI makes the barrier to creating a product so low that the only true differentiation, besides working on something unique, is taste and brand and, how people feel. Because the rest, you could, if ChatGPT gets to a point where you can say, create a cloning app that allows people to upload data and create a clone of them, then the thing that's going to miss is like the nuance of what we learn from our customers and how we can build that experience that's super intuitive.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've seen those videos of people who are using V0 and Cursor and Replit to basically just spin up simple but functional products in under an hour in a lot of cases. You guys have this interesting relationship with creators, and do you see the importance of creators in a world where there's no technical moats, or at least software is commoditized to some degree? Do you see the role of creators being more important? Is that playing into the strategy and the approach you guys are taking?
Yeah, the way I think about it is when there is abundance, it usually leads to higher demand for the thing that's scarce. And so if AI is generating content infinitely, I think people will value humans and human experiences more. And a small example, which I don't know if I'm right about making this analogy, but Wikipedia pretty much documents all of human history, all of human knowledge. Yet we still read books, we listen to podcasts, we watch YouTube videos. We don't have to do those things, but we place value in curation and experience that actually comes from a human.
Want to get more insights like that? Each week, I actually interview multiple founders. For the ones who don't join the podcast, I write up a case study and share it with all founding journey members. I also write weekly tactical deep dives, share startup opportunities, and analyze trends that I'm noticing. We've also got a community of founders, an investor and pitch deck database, and more fun stuff like over $60,000 in perks and discounts to help you build, grow, and raise capital for your startup. Go to join.foundingjourney.com to get access.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I hadn't really compared them to Wikipedia before, but that makes sense. It's like, it's actually less efficient to go watch some YouTube video for an hour than just go read a few Wikipedia pages on the topic in, 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that. But we still do it.
We still do it.
In a world where that's true, how do you see the role of a founder evolving? Because I think, in the past few years, we've seen startups bring on creators as sort of like co-founders, sometimes like pseudo co-founders, but sometimes actual co-founders. Do you see that changing? Do you see the nature of what it takes and the priorities you should have as a founder changing?
I have one follow-up question before answering. When you say founder, because I think there's going to continue to be a big split between founders of bootstrapped or, comfortable monthly SaaS companies and founders of visionary big companies. I think there's going to continue to be a very, very big difference between those two. So is there a specific one you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a great call out. I actually wrote about that in my newsletter pretty recently, where I think there's going to be this sort of Cambrian explosion on the low end of these like bootstrap founders where, these AI tools have enabled smaller markets to be valid. They've enabled more people to dive in and create software. And so there's going to be all these new smaller software companies that pop up. But for this question, I was talking about the other side, which is like, if you want to build a generational company, if you want to build a movement, if you want to build a religion behind your startup and your company, I feel like the importance of an audience probably goes up, right?
I think it does, but I don't think when I started, I had an audience. I think what led us and me to starting to get traction was consistency. A lot of people this might be a hot take. I think that, a lot of founders maybe come into YC or just their own companies with a visionary idea, and then they pivot pretty early on because they're not seeing that it's working. And so they change to something else. And there were so many times where we probably should have pivoted. Like Delphi was not working for a while. And I think this goes back to the false fail where now that software is so easy to build, the big ideas are just going to take a lot longer to prove out because they require more thought and a lot more time. And I think it took a while for creators and coaches to trust us as a company. I mean, when you're a new company, people don't really trust something, especially if it's a new product.
Yeah, you don't have the social proof and the credibility and the stamps of approval from people they know and they see working with you, and that's just not there.
Yeah.
You mentioned you guys were sort of, it wasn't working at first, right? And you were thinking about maybe pivoting. How did you make that decision? Because I think it's easy to get discouraged. It's easy, especially when you're getting feedback that maybe what you're doing is not working or the path isn't the right path, to just say, all right, there's another idea. There's something else I can pursue. What gave you the conviction to kind of keep going?
I think stubbornness, potentially, and a little bit of ego. I found value both as a consumer in Delphi, talking to clones, learning from clones, and as a creator, like my clone being available for people to talk to and learn about Delphi. And I don't think I'm that unique. There are other people who would benefit from this in the short term. And I really do believe that in the idea I told you about books and courses being desired. So it's just something I really believed. And I also just came to the conclusion that I'd rather fail following my own intuition than following someone else's advice. Because, once you kind of accept that, I don't plan to fail, like we're doing well. But once you kind of accept that, it's like when you make a mistake, based on following your intuition gets better. Versus if you make a mistake following someone else's advice, all you learned is that they were wrong that day. Your intuition doesn't actually get better. And so I want my intuition to be great. I want my intuition because that is the unique thing that we all have.
I love that. Yeah, I think that's been a big learning for me on my sort of own entrepreneurial and founder journey is trusting your instinct, honing your instinct, and sort of building up that sense of your gut intuition is actually probably one of the most important and valuable things you can have as a founder, and honing that the right way.
Definitely.
One other thing that I get from you kind of throughout this conversation is sort of just a strong sense of passion. I think even more so than a lot of other founders that I meet, and sort of the mission behind Delphi, why you're doing it. Do you think that all founders should prioritize projects and companies and ideas that they're passionate about? Or do you think that it can be more transactional and kind of still work?
I think I'm really privileged, to be honest, to work on something that I get value from and I think is really cool. Obviously, that's the best case scenario. I think it's rare, which is why I know I'm privileged. And one of the reasons I work super hard is that I know that it's very unique and rare to be able to work on something not just sexy, but also useful and with a team that you like, with investors that you like. So I definitely don't take that lightly.
How do you think about that for a venture-backed company that you have this like passion to change the world behind versus just a bootstrap company like Friday was?
I think you got to know what your outcomes are. If you're here to make money or to learn, like Friday, my goal was honestly to learn. I didn't think Friday was going to be a huge public company. I was just like, I'm going to figure out what I can do and figure out what I don't know. And it was very painful. And, as a Goggins fan, I think pain and suffering can be a good thing. So I sought the pain and suffering, and I think my threshold for pain and suffering is now higher because of it. And now when I think of what I'm doing with Delphi, like this is probably going to be working on for the next 10 or so years. And it's with a co-founder that I get along with very well. And it's with a mission that I'm excited to. I work 7 days a week, and that wouldn't be possible if I was just building buy anything with a text like Friday.
Yeah. You get to day 845 and all of a sudden, if the passion's not there, you're like, well, I'm tired today. It's good when the founder has that. It's like necessary maybe when the founder has that. But how do you distill that down into either a set of core values for the company or a mission statement that also can motivate the people and attract the right people to come work with and for you?
Yeah, in hiring, I'm very upfront. I usually tell people it's probably going to be the most challenging job you've ever worked. And it weeds out people. I had a tweet where we said we work 6 days a week, sometimes 7, and no one asked questions about it. And I got a lot of hate. But you attract the people that are like yourself. And there's one of my favorite movies, Remember the Titans. There's a line he says where he's like, attitude reflects leadership. And I think that you have to act how you believe, and you don't always even need to say anything. It's just more your actions speak for themselves.
The way that I've internalized that through my own life is sort of by interacting with various mentors at various stages of my career, right? Getting my first big tech job, having a mentor there, becoming a founder, raising venture money, having these sort of different people who you can interact with and sort of tell you about what's behind the curve, what's around the corner, right? Super helpful. I know that's been something you've had to focus on as well. Why do you see that being so important for maybe young people or specifically for founders in the way that they can distill that down for themselves?
I think when you hear something from someone, it almost adds a sense of relief, because whether it's validating your opinions or just providing perspective, like I said, we're mimetic creatures. So when someone else says something, especially someone who has achieved our version of success, it almost adds a sense of peace in a way. And I know that's kind of how I felt when I was talking to my grandpa's clone the first time. And when you're just reading a book, you're kind of on your own, figuring it out in your own mind. And it's the same thing being a solo founder, and why having a co-founder is great, because there's that back and forth and that sense of, relief and peace. And am I insane? Am I a little crazy, or am I onto something? So I think mentorship, the best form of mentorship shouldn't be decision automating. It should be decision augmenting. It enables perspective and relief and allows you to make that decision on your own.
Do you think mentors become like more or less, or does it not change in terms of their importance as you become more successful as a founder, as your company grows?
I think the human experience is always the most premium. And so even like if you have a clone that's abundant, it'll make time with you that much more rare.
Hmm.
I don't see clones as things that will replace humans, but rather clones give humans the scale of AI. And if you're lucky enough to get that in-person meeting, that will always be preferred. But otherwise, this provides access where there previously was none.
I guess as you've sort of worked closely with Keith, right? First at OpenStore, and then after he led the investment into Delphi, what have you learned from him? He's such a contrarian thinker, interesting guy. What has he brought to you personally?
He really is a true contrarian thinker. And I think he's taught me to think in power laws really well. And one example of that is just majority of startups are going to fail. So are you going to show up at some SF tech happy hour where someone gives a speech about like product advice and you're going to listen to that advice that everyone else is listening to? Is that going to lead you to being the 0.1% successful? Maybe, probably not. So it's helped me filter on the advice that I listen to. Something else that one of the values at OpenStore that I didn't really understand at first, but it's become more and more apparent is inputs over outputs. And it's based on this book called The Score Takes Care of Itself. And the idea is if you just do the right work, that will lead to the outputs versus trying to micromanage the outputs themselves. And that's his investing philosophy too. When he evaluates founders, he looks at, the inputs of what the founders have done in the past. Did they start something? Did they work super hard? Did they do anything weird? And that's usually reflective of the outputs that you'll get.
I love that book. The lesson there is so true, which is, don't try to win the game, try to do the right things and you will win. I guess, when you bring on a high profile, sort of well-known, like name brand investor like Keith and like Founders Fund, we went through the same thing when we had Andrew from Andreessen lead our Series A. It changes how people think about the company, right? Especially because in your case, Keith would probably normally lead later stage deals, larger deals, but he got involved with you guys super early. Has that changed how people have looked at you guys? And how do you think about that?
I think in the beginning, it was actually really annoying because we would get customers or potential hires whose true intention was actually they wanted to intro to Founders Fund or Keith. And happened so many times. And it was just really, really annoying. But it did give that stamp of approval for, some hires, some customers, some vendors. But after a while, no one really cares. I think if anything, it makes the expectation higher for the next round of funding. So there are pros and cons, but definitely don't regret it. It's been great working with Keith. Awesome working with Founders Fund. Really enjoyed it.
What you mentioned, how you positioned the company to him and how the company stood out to him, but you also mentioned that he sort of evaluates founders first, right? So what do you think about you specifically made you an attractive founder for him to back?
Well, I think it was both me and Sam. Sam was going to berries every single day, and Keith loves berries, and we were both kind of overachievers at Delphi. Like we would work on weekends. I think I worked every single weekend while at OpenStore, and we started the book club. And we talked about our learnings and applying the advice. So I think he saw those inputs of hard work, high intensity with berries, and curiosity for learning. And that's maybe what made him think we would be a good investment.
So that's the secret is just go to Barry's in Miami and there you go.
And a few other things, but that's one of the things.
Cool. You also have Balaji on board. He was our first investor. Super interesting guy. Any advice to other founders on sort of how to get these well-known, well-respected angels involved early? Because I think that can help you get the rest of the round, closed pretty quickly when someone like that comes on board as an angel.
I actually think for people like Balaji who are so busy, they usually base their decision on who's leading the round. So there are smaller angels where they can come first, but with Balaji, he actually tweeted about our idea a couple of years ago, and I sent him the tweet. I'm like, "Hey, we're doing this," and Keith at Founders Fund is leading the round, and he's like, "Sure, I'm in," and it's super easy.
That is as easy as it gets, right there. Our journey was probably abnormal because we had him come in first, and it helped us sort of close the rest of the round. But makes more sense that it would be that. I think, you guys fundraising in a super hot market, right? Like AI has been over the last year or two. And people sort of think that this is a cakewalk, right? They think it's super easy. You tag AI on your deck and all of a sudden people start writing you checks, right? I think, those tailwinds certainly help, but it doesn't guarantee you're going to get funded. Did you guys run into any challenges while you're fundraising?
I think an interesting data point is almost all of the major people who've invested in Delphi, I have pre-existing relationships with. And in a world of, abundant founders, the most important thing is trust, because there are a lot of grifters out there. And, I worked my ass off at OpenStore. So Keith kind of built that trust with me that way. I had met Shaheen from Lux Capital before. And so he got to know me and he invested. Anne-Lee Skates, who was at A16Z, and she reached out to us when we first started the company. We'd kept in contact for about a year, had lunch, and she recently invested. A lot of our customers, Brendan Burchard, Cody Sanchez, Matthew Hassi, who invested after getting to know the team and being customers of the product. So I think that, I don't know if this is good advice, because a lot of people tell me that I shouldn't do fundraising this way, but I like to build relationships with people that I might think about raising from, where other people might say, oh, you have to play hard to get and ignore them and not pay them any time. I've seen the cons of not doing that, because some VCs just want to talk to you to suck information from you, and that's it. So you've got to be more selective of who you give that time to. But I think it makes the long-term better when you have that solid relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think especially, these days, even in AI, relative to a few years ago, the ZERP era, right? It's more relationship driven. It's more trust driven. Investors are always looking to de-risk where they deploy their capital into. And having that layer of trust built before you even ask them for money really, really helps with that process.
Definitely. Though again, I think a lot of people would disagree.
Well, that's okay. It can work anyway for sure. But before you started Delphi, before you and Sam started Delphi, you had already, had Friday get acquired. Did you know for Delphi that it was going to be a venture-backed business early on? You were going to need to fundraise, or was it more so kind of let's see what problem we find and we'll make that decision?
I knew because I had tried to start Delphi before starting, or like while working on Friday. I created that clone of my grandpa. I created a little MVP called Helix, and posted on Twitter, and almost started that, but it was too expensive at the time, way too expensive. I was losing so much money, and so I put that aside. And at OpenStore, I was following all these researchers on Twitter and just noticed paper after paper and things getting cheaper and cheaper, and I was like, it actually might be possible to build Helix into a big company now. Decided to change the name, but I knew that whatever I do next, I didn't want to switch around anymore. Just wanted to work on something for the next 10 years.
What are the lessons that you took from Friday? Because you mentioned earlier, like you wanted to learn, right? That was your whole goal with Friday, was you wanted to learn. What were the lessons? What did it teach you that maybe would have tripped you up with Delphi if you hadn't sort of learned them first?
I learned, besides the two that I mentioned, work on something that's passionate and find a co-founder. I think that the other two big things, one is focus, like know exactly what you're working on. It's, fail to plan and plan to fail. Plan it out. Like plan out a couple steps ahead. In 10 years from now, Tony Fadell talks about this in Build, where when you have a product launch, write the press release of the product launch that you want to have. And, write the future that you want to have, write the company that you want to build. So I think planning is super important. And then the second thing is just how to deal with hardship. And it's supposed to be hard. And with Friday, I think that I ended up in like a pit where I was just like, what do I even do here? I don't even know what to do next. And I thought that was wrong, but it's a part of the journey. So I think, the first year of Delphi had a lot of those pits, but kept pushing through, kept iterating. It's all about consistency and survival. And if you can deal with the downs and survive, then you're going to head to a good place.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. We talked about how, there's these different sides of building relationships through AI. You guys are kind of on one side of that, and you've done a really good job of it. I think traditional advice would sort of say to sort of go for your niche right away, focus on that niche. But in some cases, especially with sort of new and rapidly emerging markets like you guys are in, it actually seems to make sense where maybe you want to cast a wider net and sort of let the market tell you where you're being pulled. Is that something that you guys have found to be true? Do you think it's universally true? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think big, small, big is great, especially when you're doing something new because you don't know what you don't know. We've learned a lot by seeing how people think about Delphi, how they use the product. I would actually say we're still a little bit wide. Like our ICP is knowledge-based professionals, which could include consultants, include CEOs of knowledge-based businesses, coaches, experts, content creators, course creators, influencers. But we've narrowed it down to that. So yeah, I think big, small, big is definitely useful.
And for anyone who's not familiar, can you explain big, small, big?
Yeah, it's casting a wide net and seeing what is the right group that can lead you to the full market. Because ordering is obviously very important. I think I read a story about how Pinterest found some like design community at a conference and they were the right initial group. And with Instagram, it was like these artsy photographers. And so for us, we found like these niche expert course creators who have these conferences and they host these masterminds. And they're the early adopters that lead to the rest of the market. And another decision for being wide in general is I think AI is very good at being horizontal. If you just build a cloning tool for fitness coaches, it's going to really suck to change your architecture. And the architecture you want to build is a tool that can capture how you think and direct that in a certain direction versus, just scaling fitness expertise.
I mean, it sounds like it's time for me to make a How clone. That's what I'm hearing here.
Yes, yeah. I was emailing you about your product. I could just be talking to your clone.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, hey, we have some rapid fire sort of like outro questions that we'd like to do. You up for that?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so first one, name one investor who other founders should take capital from.
Hanley Skates. I think that he is a first principle thinker, similar to Keith, but she's earlier in her career than Keith. And she's very founder friendly. I like her just because she's able to break something down and really understand it versus, some VCs will just copy paste. She's able to bring something from the ground up, which is definitely useful for category creating companies.
Yeah, Anne is brilliant. Really good partner. Glad you guys have her involved. What's one thing that you would change just about the startup world?
That's a good question. I wish there were less VCs because there's so much great talent that I want to hire and they're convinced into starting companies because maybe they went to a good school or they worked at another company. They're literally convinced into starting a company. And doing a startup for the sake of doing a startup or being convinced and doing a startup cannot be like the right way to start a company. So I think there's just an abundance of VCs and there just shouldn't be an abundance of VCs.
Well, hopefully the market will, I guess, correct and the returns that they get will force their LPs to maybe look elsewhere.
Yeah.
What's one piece of advice you have, your best piece of advice for a first-time founder?
Oh, that's a hard one. Do some work on yourself before starting. Like figure out what triggers you, what you care about, because then you have a compass. When the hard situations hit, you need a compass to get out of them. So I did a lot of work on myself, did a lot of like journaling and thinking about what I care about. So, and that has paid off for sure.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's a deep one, but it's so true. That definitely benefited me when we went through the hard times at Launch House. Having that sort of internal compass was really important. Yeah. Love that, man. Okay. Last one. This is a Peter Thielism. What's something that you believe that most people disagree with you about?
I don't think brand names matter for hiring. Good schools, so many VCs like hire someone from Google or hire someone from Harvard or Stanford. And I've just found that it doesn't matter. And in some cases, it potentially is worse.
Yeah, I think I have a firm policy at this point in my career, not hiring MBAs too early in a company's trajectory. So I'm with you on that one. Cool. Well, Dara, thanks so much for coming on, man. This was great. Thanks for coming on the pod. I know people can go to delphi.ai for the company, but where can people find you? Dara
Ladge, DaraLadje on Twitter. Apologies if I have any tweets that offend you. I try not to do that anymore, but it may come out every once in a while.
No, we want more tweets that offend people. Go for it, man. Be you.
All right, I'll think about what else I can say.
Cool, man. Well, good to have you on. Talk soon.
Thanks, Michael. Great chat.
Thanks for listening. I write up my main takeaways from every conversation and make them available to all of our members at foundingjourney.com, along with a bunch of other perks and more content. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to Founding Journey on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. I post a new episode every Thursday. Also, consider leaving us a rating or a review. As a brand new podcast, this is the best way for us to get out there and founders to find us. See you next time.